Here's quite a big breakdown of a lot of individuals involved in the client acceptance process. Client acceptance is critically important on both parts, on the part of the client and on part of the CPA firm. On the part of the client, you want to make sure that the auditor can get the job done and that they're independent and all of those things. And from the perspective of the auditor, you don't want to hire a sketchy, potentially fraudulent client, because then that's going to look bad for you. You want to, as an auditor, be involved with a high level of quality of clients. How does this whole process work? Well, the shareholders, me and you who hold the stock in a company. Now, me and you are probably not active shareholders if you're taking the exam, if you're not retiring on the beach. We're probably just buying 1 or 2 shares of Apple. But generally speaking, the shareholders, right, the big shareholders, you vote on the board of directors. Board of directors are fiduciaries to the organization. They then hire the audit committee, or not hire the audit committee. The audit committee consists of members of the board of directors. And having an audit committee is required by the PCAOB. This is talking about public companies here because we have shareholders. Then the audit committee is responsible for hiring the external auditor, which is us as the CPA, or the hiring the big four firm, or whatever it might be. They are responsible for the board of directors, hires management, makes those decisions on who is managing the company for the shareholders. Again, how does this relationship work? The shareholders are the owners of the company, whether it's one shareholder, like you've got one person owning 100% of the stock, or you've got a bunch of different shareholders who buy up a public company on the market. The shareholders elect the board of directors, who then make up the audit committee, who is then responsible for hiring these people for the benefit of the shareholders. So there's your cycle right there. The internal auditor is critically important for a company. The internal auditor is going to try to do the work. Now, obviously, they're not going to be the external auditor, right? They don't have the capacity, but it's their sole job to work on this one client. Not the client, the company they work for. They do a lot of what the auditor would do, the external auditor, but it's just a double check. You have someone working for the company full time doing audit procedures, and then you have an external independent auditor who gives you your opinion and SOX 2002, all that good stuff. Now, the external auditor could also work with a specialist. If we talked about engagement acceptance and the fact that you don't need to be an expert in the particular industry of your client, but if I am the auditor and I don't know much about derivatives and I'm working on auditing a derivatives trading firm, then I might hire a specialist who is really good at that. Let's walk through a few of these components here. Inquiry of the predecessor auditor. This is going to be on part of the external auditor. You want to see so the predecessor auditor is the one who audited the client before you did this current year. Why did the auditors change? Does management have solid integrity? You want to ask that of the predecessor auditor. If I'm PwC and EY audited last year, now I'm PwC auditing this year, let's ask EY. Were there any disagreements with management? What was the reason for you guys not being the auditor anymore? Were there any communications regarding fraud and noncompliance? And you want to review the prior work papers. You need to get permission for that. Go over that a lot more when we're talking about management, when we're talking about using predecessor auditors' work and talking about engagement acceptance. Because if you don't get a green light on all these things, then you should not accept the engagement. The internal audit function, they need to be competent. You need to understand who they report to, because the internal auditor, yes, they're hired by the client, but they need to be as independent as possible. And if they're reporting to people who they're supposed to be investigating, that's not really conducive to a positive control environment. The internal auditor should be reporting to the audit committee. They shouldn't be reporting to management. They shouldn't be reporting to specific CFO, anything like that, because the audit committee is supposed to be fiduciary, supposed to be there for the benefit of the company. Yes, management's there to run the company, but within management, you may have malicious intent. You may have aggressive people trying to skew numbers. Internal auditor also needs to have an application of systematic and disciplined approach. They just need to be good. They need to be as best as possible. They need to do their job properly. Now, with a specialist, if the external auditor is going to use a specialist, they need to understand their field of expertise, the competence and capabilities of that external specialist, and their objectivity. We also may reference specialists for issuers if critical audit matters are addressed. We'll talk about that when we get to reports. Other paragraphs, we may need permission to reference the specialist's report and specialist's work. Essentially, what we mean there is we don't want to tie the specialist in and give them responsibility that they didn't ask for, that they didn't do. Whatever's published in reports needs to be run by whoever did the work, and they take responsibility for what they did. Now, the audit committee, what do? They establish the control environment. They select and appoint the auditor. All different accounting firms bid for the ability to audit the client. They choose whichever one they think is the most effective, best reputation, cheapest. They review the quality of the auditor's work. They respond to auditor recommendations. The auditor has a responsibility. They might say, hey, we were auditing your financial statements and we saw that your cash function isn't functioning properly. We think that you should segregate these duties and have other people do different things within that function. Now it's up to the audit committee to take that. The reason why that's okay, that does not breach independence. The auditor is they're not commanding, they're not saying you have to do this. And they're just recommending things based on their experience to improve the client's internal controls and financial reporting process, which is in line with an audit. Respond to the recommendations, help resolve disagreements related to accounting treatment of material items. Management, if management's not in agreement with you, then you should go to the board of directors, the audit committee, and possibly resolve issues there. Generally speaking, with audit, if you have a problem with someone, you go to the level above them. If you have a problem with a new hire at a company, you go to their manager. If you have a problem with their management manager, you go to the management of the whole company. If you have a problem with the management, you go to the audit committee / board of directors. And if you have a problem with these people, then maybe you shouldn't have accepted the engagement to begin with. Lastly, the audit committee is a bridge between the auditor and a board of directors. As mentioned, it's a subgroup of the board of directors. They are members of the board of directors. We'll see, in some of the lessons, I incorporate different flowcharts showing how an organization is structured. This is just one of those. We'll see that in many instances throughout the exam. Lastly here, the engagement letter. We have a whole lesson for this, so not to go into it too much. This is going to define the objective and the scope of the audit, define the responsibilities of both the auditor and management. It's going to express the inherent limitations of an audit, meaning limiting our responsibility, saying, hey, yes, we're the auditor, but guess what? We're not going to be able to get every single thing. There are going to be some things that probably slip through the cracks. We're providing reasonable assurance, not absolute assurance. It's going to define the applicable framework that we are going to use, which is going to likely be GAAP. So then we are going to also reference to expected content of forms, timing. We're going to discuss fees and billing arrangements. So we're going to have a reference to all of these things, how long it's going to take, the fees and billing arrangements, everything such as that.
Hey there! Are you ready to not only pass your CPA exams, but truly understand and enjoy the material while studying? I know it seems impossible, right? Especially to enjoy the material? We'll do it together. Tap into the power of CPA.examprep.ai, where we've got personalized quizzes, multiple choice questions, memorization guides, flashcards, simulations, all tailored to your learning. Our adaptive study planning puts you on the fastest path to success and lifts you back up if you fall behind. Avoid wasting your precious time and money attempting an exam with a low chance of passing, because who wants that? We want to get you through this process as quick as possible. Our exam readiness prediction lets you walk in with confidence, knowing that you're prepared for success on exam day. Thankfully, there's no payment method needed to get started, so why don't you come join us? Visit cpa.examprep.ai and let's achieve your exam success together.